Hi, and welcome to another community discussion. We've got a great conversation here. We have two individuals who have actually gone through in firsthand workplace accidents, and they're going to share with us their learnings and experiences from this. I'm going to open up the floor. And Laurel, why don't you kick it off by introducing yourself, and then Curtis and Stephen.
Hi, I'm Laurel Youngstrom from Youngstrom Safety, and I'm in Washington State, USA.
And hi everyone. I'm Curtis Weber. I come from small town Saskatchewan in Canada.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Tamara, for putting this together today. Appreciate that. My name's Steve Stelpflug, and I'm principal and owner of WordWorks Consulting. We do safety consulting, general business and management consulting, as well as professional coaching.
Thank you. It's really great the four of us are able to get together today and chat about this topic. When a workplace accident happens, we often look into the workplace and what is happening, accident reports, and doing all the administrative stuff. And we don't then kind of look out at after the accident has happened, how does that impact other people involved, the families involved, the community? And that's what we're really wanting to talk about today. So I thank you that you're willing to come and chat with us about that and share your experiences. You know, one of the things that we were talking about when we were offline is looking at how can we be pushing beyond the traditional workplace mindset? You know, it's very industrial focused that production matters because Steve, I think you and I have also discussed this, that kind of mindset actually increases the likelihood of accidents occurring in the workplace because people aren't always able to focus.
Exactly. I think what happens in a lot of organizations from a cultural standpoint, it's a lot of things are driven by economics. And a lot of times you have competing interests, if you will, from management wanting to get projects completed quickly and as inexpensively as possible. And at the same time, you also have the other side of the safety portion of it, which does, you know, to do something well and do it safely does take additional time. And I think, you know, when you have those situations in the culture, in a company culture, you're going to have friction along those lines all the time. And until organizations realize that and recognize it for what it is and take steps, go through measures to mitigate those conflicts, then you're going to continue to have safety issues and you're going to continue to have cost issues as a result.
Curtis, what are your thoughts in this area? Because your accident actually happened to you at work.
Yeah, I think kind of bouncing off some more ideas from Steve there. I think for me, what I speak to a lot when I share my story of my injury and the background I also have in safety since my injury is that oftentimes, as Steve mentioned, we're trying to incorporate when we talk about culture or social safety systems. We're talking really about culture and developing that culture and maintaining that. And in order to do that, we obviously need both sides to have a part in that. And I always reference from the employer side, and we can speak to the injured worker side, you know, as we go along as well. But I often tell the people that I speak to is that when I work with leadership groups, is that we can't be considered successful in our production targets if we're injuring people along the way, and we can't be considered, you know, top-notch, top quality products either if we're injuring people along the way. So I think that it's important to separate, like we mentioned, obviously the production side that needs to be there and the safety side that needs to be there for our people, but understanding we can't have success in one area of production or quality without having the other area of success in safety as well. So
Now, Laurel, you're coming at this from a different perspective because the accident happened to your loved one. And so I'd kind of like to to look at, this concept of, the industrial focus in the workplace is very much that we're pushing the workers to produce, to be quicker and quicker. And after going through the experience that you have had, how can you see whether or not that kind of impacted having an accident and how that impacted your family life then?
Well, I think my husband was a painter, commercial painter, and they always wanted to be the fastest. They wanted to get it done the quickest. And I think most of that was because they wanted to be recognized as the ones that wouldn't be laid off when the weather got a little bit worse. They just they wanted to be the ones that didn't get laid off. And I think that was a big motivator for just doing it as fast as they could.
Yeah, and that, I think that's a very important point to be diving into, because when we talk about production, we typically think of the product at the end, but what we're really backing up and talking about is how does that impact people's thinking about the processes they need to go through or what they may be able to cut in order to speed their process along.
Well,
Exactly.
I could speak to that a little bit. Having served in senior management for a large heavy industrial construction company, I saw firsthand. I began in marketing with that company, and going out and soliciting bids and writing proposals, and then you're going to get a certain percentage of the bids of the projects, at least you hope. And then once the bids are awarded, let's say you're bidding a $50 million job, and the bid has been awarded, and the contract, I mean, it may be a $50 million job, but you may have bid it at 35 million in order to be competitive and make sure you get the work. So now you're already, 15 million in the hole, so to speak, as a company. And the operations side of the business may or may not know what that final number, or that bid number was, or that award number was. They are told that yes, we received this award, and they may be told that we received the award. It's a $30 million job, when actually senior management could be sandbagging and $5 million for contingencies or whatever they're doing. So that project manager who's over that project is now working with a $30 million budget, as opposed to what they assumed would be a $50 million budget. So now immediately, steps are being taken to go in and meet that 30 million, still meet the requirements of the project and do a good job and get it done on time so that the customer is satisfied. But now you're actually $20 million down from where you thought you were going to be starting. So there's a tendency to start looking at, okay, what can we cut back on in order to meet this budget? And it may be manpower, it may be materials, it may be, just job hours. So there's even more pressure at that point to bring the project in on time and on budget. So I think that companies that work under those conditions, within those cultures, they're setting themselves up for failure in a way, because now all it takes, so by that time your margins are so slim by the end of the project, all it takes is one incident, one injury, and you've got basically a losing project. You're losing money. So,
some companies don't think about that ahead of time.
Yeah, I think to piggyback again off of Steve's point in terms of underbidding on a project to get the work, I think that sometimes we as a group, an organization as a whole, when we get in that situation where we are looking at cutting dollars here and there, and where are we going to do that because we've come in under budget to get the project, I think that we often forget, both as the employer as well as the employee, that when we're in those situations in today's world, we don't get the next job if our safety rating as a company has hit.
Exactly.
It's a pretty big risk to cut, whether it's culture or costs in terms of safety or PPE or processing. So that's another thing that I speak a lot to, is that from both the employer side and the worker side, we both have to be diligent on safety. We both have to invest and believe in it and do it. But at the end of the day, if we don't do it, if one side or the other doesn't do it, or both, the likelihood of us getting the next bid, because our safety record has fallen, because we've underbid and because we're rushing to get the project done, really ultimately hurts that long-term employment for the employees.
You're exactly right, Curtis. It really begins a downward spiral when you're in that situation, because the incentive at that point, let's say you do have an injury, or you have a series of near misses, and you can document those, and we all know what the pyramid looks like, the inverted pyramid looks like. So when you begin to look at it, now there's so much pressure within the organization to, let's just say, do something not as honest as they should be doing, and they begin to put a bit on the safety reports, and so that it doesn't look so bad. And all that does is set you up for a bigger and bigger potential for failure.
I think this is a great discussion in terms of obviously we realize and we know that the responsibility is a shared one between the employer and the worker. And speaking from my personal experience as the injured worker, nearly fatally injured worker on a construction site, I can certainly speak to the aspect of the worker, and I can only speak to that because I don't run a big corporation, I don't bid on projects, I don't do those things. But for me, in my situation, and I know it can be completely different for the next injured worker, but I put a lot of responsibility on myself and myself that day. I had every opportunity that day to say, you know what, I've had experience. I was 17 when I was injured. People often view that as maybe a downfall, that I was a young impressionable kid. That's we're at that age, we're impressionable people. We want to put your head down, keep your mouth shut, and just go to work. And people often think that because I was 17, that I wasn't properly taken care of and things. And just a quick little backstory is that I had a ton of experience in doing the construction that I was doing that day. I was raised in a family business doing that, and all of a sudden left the family business 3 days into my first ever real job outside the family business doing similar work, is when my life changed. And I know that when we were doing the work that we were doing, I know that the task we were doing was unsafe. I knew it wasn't the best way. It wasn't even the quickest or most efficient way. But because I was 17 years old, because I was on the third day of my first ever real job, and because our day was going sideways, I didn't take the opportunity. And I can't put that necessarily on my employer, because I knew what we were doing was not the right way to do it, and I still chose to do it. So although we've got a huge, when I do my presentations, I speak differently to leadership than I do to the employee groups.
Exactly.
But the message is the same.
Ultimately,
we do too. It needs to be, supported by leadership and carried out by the coworkers, because we always hear that the communication is good, our culture is good, and we can get all rah about our safety culture within a company. But if it's really not supported at a leadership level, and it's at the same time not really driven by the employee level, it just doesn't work. Because I've worked for several companies, big corporations that have amazing safety management systems, and I still talk to employees afterwards that come up after my presentation and say, you're exactly right, I need to put more ownership on myself than I do my employer, because at the end of the day, my director, my VP or CEO is not standing beside me in that pit or on the construction site, and we've got pretty difficult decisions to make ourselves.
So let's break that open a little bit. When we're at work, it is a social system. And I don't think we often look at it that way. We're groups of people coming together with a common objective often. And so how can we be nurturing or cultivating more trust and care in the workplace so that people are, helping to watch out for one another, So if somebody sees you taking a risk and pushing beyond that boundary, they care enough to
Mhm.
say, "Hey, wait a minute. Like, let's back
Right.
this up. What do we need to get to that spot?"
Well, I think
I think we
we need.
just need to make it more. Go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead, Laurel.
We need to make it more of a relationship. Just encourage relationships within the company, within the employees, within the supervisors, foremen. They need to get to know their folks.
Mm-hmm.
Get to know their passion, get to know what makes them tick, and get to know why they want to go home every night. It's
Right.
different for everyone, and you have to find out what that individual's passion is, and and be specific. Learn their family members' names, and hey, don't you want to be able to see that new grandbaby next month? Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Make it a relationship, make it personal, because they're not gonna. It's an old saying, but people are not going to care how much you know until they know how much you care. So they need to know that you care about them, and you can't fake it. You have to be genuine.
That's
Yeah,
true.
those are the people, like you say, when we're talking about, building those relationships at work with people and building that culture at work where people feel comfortable going to one another and voicing
Mm-hmm.
concerns, questions, and maybe intervening and saying, hey, I know we're rushed to get this job done, but we're supposed to be tied off here when we're working at this site. So let me give you a hand. Let's get it. Let's get rigged up and do
Exactly.
it. But we need that, that opportunity where people feel comfortable going to one another and having those conversations for sure.
Well, I think what Curtis and Laura, what you're talking about, it's a grassroots approach, and it starts with the individual employee, and then from there it goes up to his or her foreman, to the superintendent, to project manager. I'm just giving it in the construction world. It may be different
Mm-hmm.
in a factory setting, it may be different in other workplaces, but um, it has to start from there, but it also has to start from the 60,000 foot level. And so when you have budgets being set, they have to be realistic. And there are a couple of studies that I read. One I just read about a year and a half ago, where a company, a safety company that also advertises with the Safepedia frequently, did a survey of shareholders and what their thoughts on safety were versus returns on investment. So, in fact, overwhelmingly, the shareholders were behind they would be willing to take a smaller reward
Mm-hmm.
if they knew that the people performing the work in the companies that they represented or their subcontractors were working more safely.
Right. I
So
mean, even it sounds like they are on board with flipping that pyramid of importance and making the employees on top.
so then knowing that, now you have to ask yourself, so why is there this perceived pressure to cut costs? And that, I think, is one of the real issues that American or businesses worldwide actually need to start looking at and saying, look, if we start with unrealistic expectations because we're trying to satisfy some perceived notion by some, these shareholders, which are kind of nefarious, really, nobody knows who the shareholders are. You could be somebody in a 401k, one of a million people as a shareholder for a particular company. So, but you have that perceived level of, gosh, we got to get it done. We got to get it done cheap and fast and good and all these things. Well, the problem is those aren't realistic expectations to begin with. So until I think we have to address it at that level, as well as the individual worker level, and then up through organizations at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's we've got some barriers and some I guess myths in play that we need to look at. How can we break them down because these myths do create a fear amongst the workers that they have to push themselves in a way that then we're finding out later upper management by no means would want them to be doing this. And upper management, when you get to that executive level, are very distraught to find out that somebody has gotten hurt because they weren't feeling comfortable taking the time to do safety protocols. So then it becomes, where is it in the system that this false pressure is being cultivated?
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Right?
think
Exactly. And
you're right. There is that sense of false, pressure in some instances. And when we're going to talk about a lot of different groups, we can talk about organizations that, from the top down, right through the employees, are just that they believe, and we're going to have everybody in between that one side or the other doesn't believe or care enough. But I think certainly, like you say, there's that false sense where, people, they have that. And I think for when we look at the organizations, when it comes to safety, people often forget about the impacts of as Laurel can talk about, that's what we need to think about are those people. And I think for within the organizations is it's, you know people are very competitive people, as for us to be competitive. So if I'm someone putting together a scaffold, my competitive nature is to be the first one to get it done, or to whatever task it is. We're competitive people, and that doesn't mean that we're doing things wrong. But even though we might have a system in place at work where leadership believes and leadership gives us the time, I've seen it time and time again where leadership has said, I don't care if the task takes you 40 minutes longer, but to do it properly and safely. And I still talk to the
That's
employees
good.
about my presentations, and they still come up and say, you know what, they do believe in our safety, but at the end of the day, we're competitive. We want to beat the next guy beside us, a coworker, whether it's a friendly rivalry or we're just have that competitive nature built within us, and that alone kind of creates a wedge sometimes that we want to get that task done quicker. And we don't always think about that yes, we're very skilled, we're very experienced, and we can get the job done quicker than the next person. We're still not taking that info from the supported leadership and using it, but also thinking about, if we are taking that extra time, what would my wife and my kids think if my employer told them, we've said that if it takes you 40 minutes to do the job safely, we'd rather you take the extra 40 minutes. What would my family think if they knew that I didn't take that extra 40 minutes because I just wanted to be the first one done, or take or pride myself in doing a good job and getting it done quickly. And that's where we need to think about. And that's where, Laurel, I think you can speak just as well as anybody too as well, in terms of who ultimately is affected by it.
Right.
Not
And not only competitive, I think that as human beings, we like to take risks. I mean, look at these extreme sports. It's like, oh, I didn't die that time, so I'm just going to do it a little more dangerously this time. We just have that inside of us. We just like to take risks, or a lot of us.
Yeah, Laurel, I'm thinking back to our conversation when you and I first met and when we were talking. And one of the things that you brought up to me was, which was very touching, was the concept of encouraging workers to focus on their why while at work. And I thought that was very interesting. Can you share more about that?
Sure. It's just so easy to get focused on the task at hand when you're at work and you forget why you're there. Might be different for everybody, but basically it's to make a better life for you and your family. And you're not going to have a better life if you get injured. Your family's not going to have a better life if you get killed. You just need to think about them when you're at work. And so my husband, he admits he never thought about his family when he was at work. He just thought about what he was doing and doing it as fast as he possibly could. And I mean, that's what happens. It's too late then. You have to be making that split-second decision, and you have to want to be safe. So whatever it is that makes that person want to be safe, the supervisors have to work with it. Might not be a wife or a kid, maybe it's a dog. Maybe it's a motorcycle. Whatever it is that they really, really want to do when they get home, say, hey, don't you want to be safe so you can go home and do that?
Curtis, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Now, knowing what you know now, if you were to tell that 17-year-old 3-day on-the-job kid to work safely, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have, and even not knowing that I was 17 or that young age group, certainly I would have, even in the circumstance that I was in, I would definitely say to use that instinct that this isn't right. It's not the best way. It's not the safest way. It's not even the fastest or most efficient way. They were kind of a newer company to what they were doing, and I brought more experience to them. In fact, after the first couple of days, I
Oh,
voiced my concern to them,
gosh.
saying, "Hey, there's a better way to erect this steel structure that we were working on, and this is the way that we did it within the family business since I was a little boy. I was around that job site, the same job site, since I was 5 years old, and my job went from, and my brother's jobs at the same time when we were younger, our jobs went from being 5 and 6 to picking up nuts and bolts the guys were dropping on site, running guys' tools, whatever they told us to go get on the truck. And then as we got older, our jobs got more significantly increased and important to the point in our early teens, 14, 15, we could physically, help build those structures ourselves. So I think bringing that experience to that organization, and in fact, it was going to be the next week that they were going to let me kind of run the crew in terms of how we did,
Oh, wow.
show them, the way that we did things, and I never got there, obviously, to help with that, but certainly that 17-year-old kid, it's just like every other one of us. Everyone's been that age. We're impressionable people. Put your head down, keep your mouth shut, like I said. But also, I think with my injury, I probably would have been the type of kid that would have spoke up even, but the day was just, it just went so off the rails for us. It was the Friday of a long weekend. We were supposed to be home at lunchtime, 2 quick jobs out of town. Our first job, we spent 3-4 hours setting up the wrong structure, and then having the contractor say, hey,
Oh,
this isn't what we had ordered, and it wasn't our fault. We just showed up to set up. But now we spent another couple hours tearing down what we had done, still having to travel to that second job, and realizing really quickly we ended that day on a pretty, and this is a really important point for me in my presentations and sharing with people, is that oftentimes we enter our workday with a really positive, happy vibe. Whether it's Friday before the weekend, or if you're in industrial settings, it's your last set of days before you got a vacation coming up, right? Our mindsets are a little
right.
different when we know it's the last day of work as opposed to when it's our first day of work. And for us, it's the Friday of a long weekend. Boss had good news. We're going to be home early by lunch. We can kick off our long weekend a little bit earlier. So I think for me, there was so much that went into the day that, I can't say for sure. But if everything went the way that it was supposed to up until that point of day, and say it was 11:30 in the morning and we're almost wrapping up, and then that situation came up, while everyone was still happy, positive, looking forward to the long weekend with their families, I likely would have said, "Hey guys, what are we doing? This is not the way we should be doing. There's a better way, an easier way, a faster way." But all those things combined, my age, third day on the job, working with complete strangers, people twice my age, and now you throw in the mix that everybody's
Mm-hmm.
frustrated to begin with. I really think that was
Yeah.
the point of it. But to your point, Steve, yeah, I would, you know, definitely encourage myself, no matter the situation, no matter, that's not a good enough excuse for me, and it's not a good enough excuse for my family that went through what they had to say, oh, well, we were rushing, we were behind, that's why I didn't speak up. It's something that we need to, just not have any excuses for when we do feel uncomfortable, for sure.
So you actually felt comfortable speaking up in that I mean, you would have if it would have been a different situation that same day.
I believe so. I can't say for sure, but I got to believe that if we were all a happy
Hmm.
crew doing our job that day,
Yeah.
like we were when we were driving to site, we're like, oh, wow, that's great news from the boss. You know, some of the guys that had families and kids, they were phoning their wives and saying, hey,
Hmm.
we don't got to wait till the end of the day to go to the cabin or go to the lake. They were saying,
Oh.
pack the van, get the cabin ready. We'll be there early. And so I do believe that, you know, I can't say for sure, but I think that was
Hmm.
probably the biggest thing. And not just for me speaking up, but the biggest reason why the incident happened. I think that if we were on time, things were going the way they should go. And we all know that in most of our jobs, our days more often than not don't go the way that we plan them to or want them to. But I got to believe that if things were going according to plan, you know, we might have even had the time to have a conversation to say, this is the way we're going to do this. Does anybody have a better idea? We might have had that conversation or
Hmm.
that, say, hey,
Right.
everybody comfortable here? But because we were rushing, because we were behind, because it's the Friday the long weekend, we were realizing that there, regardless, we were going to have to come back on Saturday morning to
Hmm.
finish the job, which would have completely ruined our long weekend. But had that not been the case, I really believe us as a whole entire group would have been more welcoming to taking the extra 5 minutes to say, hey, is this the best way to do this, or what are we doing here? But we just said, hey, this
Hmm.
has to be done, and we just all scattered and went to what we thought we should do.
I've done hundreds, unfortunately, of incident investigations and reports over the years, and that those circumstances that you just described have to be the number one set of circumstances where
Hmm.
injuries occur. And again, it's a kind of a vortex of circumstances that tend to come together and create either a sense of haste or hurry, or we've got to, instead of doing two separate lifts, we're going to do one lift and
Hmm.
knock both of these things out at once, and we'll be back on schedule and we'll be able to get off on time and all of those things. And it's inevitably those types of scenarios, situations where incidents occur.
Yeah,
I,
Darren Sutton calls it the perfect storm.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Russ said. My husband, he said that it was the perfect, the perfect environment, the perfect day, the perfect everything for that to happen. 'Cause everything was just kind of going wrong, and everybody was in a big hurry, and it was raining. Of course, you know, it was Seattle, so of course it was raining. But I mean,
The other thing Curtis mentioned was, and this is, I don't know if anybody else picked up on it, was he didn't follow his instinct.
hmm.
And that is another factor that inevitably comes up every time I've ever interviewed anybody who's been injured on a job. They almost always tell me, I knew I should have listened to myself. I didn't follow my instinct. I didn't follow my gut. And whether, it's somebody getting, the tip of their finger, amputated, or whatever the injury is, it's almost inevitably somebody not following, knowing that their gut is telling them to do something better or do it differently, and not following that instinct.
So,
And
so the question would be, what encouraged you to ignore that inner voice?
I think it was just the scenario of the day. Like I said, if everything was on course to be home early on that Friday the long weekend, I very well likely would have said, "Hey guys, this is stupid. What are we doing? This is the way we should do it, and let's do it this way." Um,
Hmm.
because I think that when you talk about, whether it's ego or self doubt, we can use those, almost interchangeably, because our ego drives.
Yeah, exactly.
Self doubt is the byproduct of can't, when we don't get those things done that we thought we could have.
Hmm.
Now we're saying, well, what could have been? And so I think that, it's one of those, and for us that day as well, I speak to the fact that, there was just a hidden type of, a certain situation where we were working around a power line. The material, the stuff that we're working with, some of it needed to be on the other side of the power line. So we can talk all about if we're doing, root cause
Mm.
analysis way back to like months before we even showed up on the job site to say, why was the material delivered on either side of the power line? That's
Mm-hmm.
nothing I focus on during my presentations, because we're always faced with challenges at work. And if we just kind of relay, set it aside and say, well, this person did this, if they didn't do that, we wouldn't be here. But at the end of the day, we all work within a certain set of conditions. And whether the conditions are crappy
Right.
or the way that we need them
Yeah.
to be or they could be, that's for us to figure out, right? That's why we get paid to do what we do, is that we can, figure out how to do that. But for us, um, that set of conditions was waiting that day for months before we showed up. And that set of conditions that the material was delivered on either side of the power line,
Mm-hmm.
that environment was waiting for the right crew, or if you want to look at it differently, the wrong crew to come along, just like we were frustrated, behind, rushing, that set of conditions was waiting for a crew like us to show up. And that's when it bites, really, is that when there's a set of
Right.
conditions there, and it's just waiting for the wrong group to arrive, or the wrong person to arrive that's in a different mindset, or that, like we were that day, rushing and behind and frustrated. Like I say, the best part of prevention would have been us, not that it was in our power, but if everything was, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
times now, if it was going according to
Where it
plan,
was supposed to be at the beginning.
yeah, would have handled that situation like,
Mm.
happens 1,000 other times with people, without incident. But the circumstances were different for us that day.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you. We are almost at the end of our time. I wanted to ask you, did you have anything that you really wanted to share with people listening before we go? Laura, why don't you kick that off?
Well, I'm the wife of an injured worker. You don't ever think you're going to be introducing yourself like that, but that's me. It was 24 years ago, and he has had 32 surgeries now as of last week. It doesn't end. So, if you try to get your folks to think about their families, talk to your team about our whole family has gone through this for 24 years. It was in 1995, and he's a paraplegic, and he has all the complications that come with being a paraplegic, and he's getting older, so it's not getting easier, and we just don't want anyone else to go through it. We want people to be just thinking twice before they do something that's going to affect themselves and everyone around them.
That's really, really powerful stuff there, Laurel. And I think that from the injured worker's perspective now, I think that oftentimes what people forget when you have incidents like this, mine was electrical overhead power line, ended up losing a left lower leg and a amputation on the right arm as well, and burns third and fourth degree to over 60% of my body. So it was a long, grueling time, 6 weeks in a coma, and about 7 months total hospital initially, with 35 surgeries. And then it was really the beginning recovery of physiotherapy and reconstructive and plastic surgery. So from small town Saskatchewan, a little young kid, traveling back and forth to Toronto for 10 to 12-hour procedures, about 14 reconstructive and plastic surgeries, was not as difficult for me as I think it was for my family and my friends and my community. And that's what people forget a lot, is the fact that when these incidents happen, whether we're talking ego, like Steve mentioned, or self-doubt, like you mentioned, Tamara, it's something that we often forget, is that I have no recollection of the day of my injury. I was in a coma for 6 weeks. I don't have a recollection of anything till probably 7 weeks after it happened. So everything that happened in that time, the amputations, the surgeries, the burns, my parents coming in, first night, and viewing me looking like I was completely normal, which was weird, because that's what they said the first day that I was there. I looked completely normal, other than my skin color was a little bit off. But coming back the next day, the burns were really setting in, and they said, I was unrecognizable. And those are things that I don't remember. Those are things that I didn't have to endure with my family. And here are my parents being told that your son's not going to survive his injuries. You need to bring his, 13-year-old little brother and 21-year-old older brother to come in and spend some time with him because he's not going to be here much longer. So as difficult as that is for me to go through what I went through physically, this never affected me mentally or emotionally, not 1 second of it. Thankfully, for whatever reason, I've just kind of dealt with it all in stride. But that's not the case for my family, my parents and my brothers. They were there watching, the amputations go from a couple fingers to a hand and a couple toes to a foot and the foot to below the knee. And so I just want our messages here today to be not only about the safety of ourselves, but really, as Laurel, laid it out quite nicely earlier, is that the people that we're affecting by our actions at work are the people that we least most want to hurt, right? It's and thanks for sharing your story as well, Laurel. It's been great getting to know you and your story as well, and I think that's something that we forget to think about, is how much other people are affected by our own injuries. Even though, for me, in my instance, I've just, like I said, dealt with it in stride. But I can tell you from the conversations, we're not a touchy-feely family, family of 3 boys, 3 kids. But certainly over the years, we've had conversations of, how difficult it was for them. And that's something, fortunately for me, but unfortunately for them, they had to remember and will always remember.
Well, I've been fortunate from the standpoint that I've never personally been injured or, but having been in human resources and safety for as many years as I was in the capacity that I was in, you see sometimes even relatively minor injuries and how those can manifest within families over time, or, especially a severe injury, Curtis, like what you experienced, and Laurel, like what your husband experienced. Because you've got the individual who's impacted initially, and then that becomes like a ripple on a pond, and it spreads from there. Let's say you get, I've had employees who've been injured on the job, and they go into rehab, and they can't come back to work in full capacity for whatever reason, and that leads to, in some cases, other problems. They start drinking or doing drugs. Families dissolve, they get divorced, children are affected, and whole families just from one single incident. Now you have affected, 50, 100 other lives. And I've seen it firsthand. And at the same time, I think we need, to speak to Tamara's point, we need to step back and take a look at and say, yes, we're trying to be productive, we're trying to build things, we're trying to do things as businesses, but really and truly, at the end of the day, I mean, we all pay for every incident. We all pay. It doesn't matter if you're paying through higher consumer costs, you're paying higher taxes because now you're supporting people who are on disability or whatever, we're all paying for these things. So if we step back and we look at from all the way from the shareholder down to the individual on the line and say, look, how can we do all of these things better and safer? And what is our incentive? How much productivity is lost? How many billions and billions of dollars are spent each year because of, safety incidents? So if you look at the big picture, and it's almost like, you're really throwing that coin or that rock into the pond, and those ripples are going out. Well, they can go out in a negative way, or they can go out in a positive way. And I think.
No, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very clear, speaking to both you, Curtis and Laurel, that we really do need to create more care at work. We do need to bring that in. So thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences, because this is important to get out, you know. And thank you, Steve, for joining us and bringing the health and safety professional perspective. I really am grateful that you came here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Tim.
Yes, thank you guys. Appreciate having us.
Great getting to know Curtis and Laurel.
So are you guys going to join us at the Safety Connect Virtual Conference Expo in October?
Absolutely.
Good.
Sure.
And yeah, you can register at industryconnectsafety.com. So Curtis, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. Safeopedia is going to be hosting the first virtual conference in a virtual setting. So it's actually, you go in and it'll be a virtual exhibit hall and everything. It's kind of cool.
Cool.
Very cool. Yeah.
I'll definitely check it out.
Absolutely. I think it'll be very worth. It's a very different experience. You know what? I wonder if I could do this. Hold on. Show screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Not yet. Oh, there we can.
Yeah. Okay. I like doing this. It's fun. Are you ready? Look at this. So yeah, so I'm just going to take you to the lobby. I'm not going to go anywhere else, but isn't that kind of cool?
Very cool. Do we get our own avatars?
Oh, wow.
You have to sign up to figure that one out. You have to sign up to figure
Our
that
own avatars. That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a pleasure
cool.
to talk to you guys. I'm really glad. I hope that we can do this again sometime. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.